The Secret Loong quest kicks off in Chapter 2, but it takes place across Chapters 1 through 4. It involves 4 boss fights against increasingly difficult enemies, and all 4 are a good bit harder than the rest of the foes in the chapter where they're found. This video covers the rather ambiguous hint the game gives you to start you off on this quest, how to get the Loong Scales, and how to beat Red, Black, and Cyan Loong. Now Yellow Loong, located in Chapter 4, is the most difficult of the bosses, and so for that, he's going to get his own video because there's a lot to cover. Be sure to get subscribed and look forward to that video coming out in the near future. Hey, if you find this helpful, maybe leave a like and share it with a friend. For now, let's start with the dialogue that begins your quest.
When the Loong King defied the court, the Jade Emperor was set to punish his entire house. The 4 sons of the Loong King, deities of the 4 waters, fled. Deities, not even they have control over their destinies. Once caught in the threads of karma, all are mere offerings on the platter. 4 longs for the 4 waters under the sky. Their destiny is sealed, as yours and mine.
Yep, that was about as clear as mud. Luckily, there are some other hints on the locations for each Loong. More accurately, you hear a little voice line as soon as you get close to know you're in the right place. But to access any of these, you're going to need the Loong Scale. You can unlock the Loong Scale area during your battle with the first rat prince. Lure him over to this clay wall and get him to smash it with your attacks. If you already killed the boss, don't worry about it, because you can use the Wandering White or another powerful attack from one of your transformations, such as Azure Dust, to smash the wall and enter the cave. Inside you get a bit of dialogue and the Loong Scales, which are used to access all of the subsequent bosses. So first up, Red Loong is found behind the waterfall in the Forest of Wolves. Even though this is in Chapter 1, you won't be able to access it until you've completed a good part of Chapter 2. Start from the outside of the forest shrine, and then take a left of a fork guarded by the 2 Yaoguai. After that, take another left and keep along the path until you reach the waterfall. Then simply dispel the waterfall, and enter to do battle with Red Loong.
For what deed must his head be hung for all to see? For what deed must the waters they govern roam through? For what deed must all matters not known how to be? For what deed must mercy's hand so woe upon thee? For what deed must the red one into the woods flee? Smoke rises high from wood afire. Hit the back, let the beasts respire, as in mist thunders conspire.
Now Red Loong has a lot of health, but after staggering him, you're able to directly attack the contraption on his back and deal massive bonus damage. This is the most effective way, and really the only effective way to defeat the boss. For a lot of his basic attacks, he either swipes at you with his claws or flies up in the air, then does a strafing run, clawing as he rushes past. When he charges these claws of electricity, don't immediately run back to do damage to the boss, because they're going to leave behind a little cloud of energy which explodes shortly after the initial strike. So if you run back too soon, you'll end up taking damage from the aftershock. Overall, his basic sequences aren't too bad, but there are a couple of special moves which you need to pay attention to. The first of which is his roar attack. When he lets out his roar, he almost immediately emits a powerful burst of electricity dealing heavy damage. This attack has a very short animation, making it difficult to avoid. So if you see the contraption on his back start to glow and charge the air with particles, run away immediately, because if you try to dodge once he started the roar, there's a good chance you're going to be too slow. In addition to his regular attacks, he also uses tail swipes. After all, he is a dragon, and so being behind him is just as dangerous as being in front. Now most of the tail swipes have a bit of a longer animation, so you can either dodge them, use Cloud Step to get out of the attack entirely, or if you feel confident, deflect it using Stone Form. These tail swipes have a couple variations, where he either uses a wide arc or lashes directly down, but they do a lot of damage thanks to the electrified blade he holds with his tail. So do your best to avoid these, and if you do get hit, quickly use your gourd to heal up. And last up, his stagger mechanic. This is the key to defeating the boss. Deal damage to him to stagger him. After you do, he crashes to the ground and exposes the contraption on his back, which is your chance to deal massive damage by attacking it directly. So move to the correct side of the boss to attack the contraption. For each pot you destroy, the boss loses a large chunk of health. Also, try to save your focus for this phase, because a charged heavy attack is much more effective than something like a light finisher. Now, you should always target these pots after staggering the boss, but it's a little tricky because you aren't able to lock onto them individually. Personally, I found with Thrust Stance, I was able to position myself well enough to damage these, but if you're still struggling, consider using Pillar Stance instead. There's a bit more AoE on its charged heavy. If you don't deal enough damage in time, the boss begins to glow and emits a large lightning explosion. And so, with that, here's an example of a full fight. Next up, you have Black Loong, who resides in Chapter 2, behind the sandfall at Fright Cliff. Starting from a rock crest flat shrine, all you really have to do is go up the stairs. Then use the Loong Scales to dispel the sandfall and enter the hidden area. After you do, you will encounter a fight that is very different from Chapter 1. Black Loong wields two maces. His attacks are much slower and more methodical. They almost have a rhythm to them, but they also do incredible damage. And throughout the encounter, he empowers his attacks with electricity, causing them to inflict shock, create explosions, or generate a wave of electricity that expands out from a point of impact. For an example of this, he uses a move that's very similar to Yellowbrow, the Chapter 3 boss, where he twirls his mace right above his head before slamming it down, releasing a projectile that crawls towards the player. Then he does the same thing with his left mace. Then he follows this by clapping the two weapons together, causing an explosion that releases a shockwave which you either have to jump over or dodge through. Personally, I found that for this and many of his other attacks, it's easier to temporarily retreat, give yourself a space to dodge the projectiles, and then jump over a shockwave before moving in to do damage again. Since his attacks are more slow and rhythmic, you don't lose too much uptime by doing this. One of his more challenging moves, though, is his Sandstorm. Basically, he twirls his weapons, generating a sandstorm that it slowly expands outwards. If you're within the radius, it slows you, and it makes it difficult to see when he releases the explosion of electricity at the end. If you're fast, you can use Cloud Step, or more specifically the strike at the end, to interrupt this ability. Just don't wait too long, otherwise you're going to get hit by the explosion at the end. This move as a whole starts very similarly to a different attack, where he clashes his weapons together. That attack seems to have a stagger effect, where you'll get stunned for a short duration every time he clashes, but also that only deals damage in a very small radius around the boss, so as long as you're a good bit away, you avoid it entirely and automatically. But far and above his most dangerous mechanic is his transition mechanic. This happens around both 60 and 20% health. He charges himself with electricity, then roars, and after this he begins rhythmically pounding the ground with both weapons. Each attack releases an aftershock that expands out. So, when he starts to glow, move away from the boss immediately. Then you either jump over or dodge each aftershock. The tricky part is, he alternates the timing. So it might be jump, 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 dodge, jump. Because the last three shockwaves come too close together and if you simply try to jump over all of them, right after you land from your first jump, as you're starting your second, the next aftershock will hit you. This was brutally difficult. Luckily, as long as you don't take too many hits and you don't take too many consecutive hits, you do kind of get to heal up before the move ends. After doing all that, he pauses for a moment before pulling both of his weapons out of the ground, creating a very fast-moving aftershock, which again hit me most of the time. The tell for this is, after he slams his weapon down, energy condenses into the maces before exploding outwards in the shockwave. Unfortunately, even though I could see this, I usually couldn't react in time to perfectly dodge it. Luckily, if you top yourself with your gourd, it's not going to be instantly lethal. But like I said, I did get hit a lot on this one, and it didn't end up ending my run. Personally, I went back and did Black Loong after completing most of Chapter 3. So I was a fair bit overgeared, and he was still quite difficult. It feels like this boss was very much made with a sense of rhythm or timing in mind. So, if you're good at that, it should be a piece of cake for you. But if you're struggling, really focus on doing your best to survive those transitions, because for most of the rest of the fight, the correct answer is move away from the boss and give yourself time to dodge. There's very few long-range projectiles that are super threatening on this encounter. Also, if you're ever stuck in a situation where you feel like, I just don't have time to dodge or I'm just not good enough, you can use Cloud Step for the extended distance. You could use the Non-Void Spirit for a little bit of a dash away with iframes, kind of a second dodge, or you can use a transformation to give yourself extra health and tank the damage. But with that said, if you want to see all of this in practice, here's how the fight went for me. Then third up you have Cyan Loong. He's located right behind the Turtle Island Shrine in Chapter 3. Simply head down the slope and move to the left to encounter Cyan Loong frozen in place of his fishing pole. If you approach him while you possess the Loong Scales, he wakes up, transforms his pole into a blade, and begins attacking you. Now in comparison to many other bosses, he has a pretty simple attack pattern. But, especially when his weapon is charged, his attacks are highly damaging. Luckily, he's also more vulnerable to interruption than many other bosses, so if you focus on the use of your heavier attacks, your light finisher, your charged heavy, all that, you should be able to give yourself an opening or even stop some of his basic combos. One little tip though in dealing with his basic combos, he often ends them by charging his fists with lightning or unleashing some sort of AoE attack. So in this case, dodging forwards or backwards is probably better than left or right, as sometimes when you dodge left and right you can still get caught by the AoE. This is a little counterintuitive because on most bosses, dodging left or right is the safest thing to do, and to be fair, dodging left or right does still effectively counter almost all of his attacks, just especially when he's empowered his weapon, do be a little bit careful. What's a bit harder to avoid are his aerial moves, where he rises or floats up into the air, then slams down, doing some sort of attack as he does. For most of these, you need to dodge as he starts descending rather than when he rises up in the air. And the timing is a little bit shorter, especially for his charge attack. This one is very difficult to avoid, and it caught me way more times than I wish to admit. You need to watch for when he reverses his grip on his sword. That's the tell for this move, and that means you need to prepare to dodge as soon as he starts charging towards you. Now, as his health gets lower, Cyan Loong begins empowering his blade. This causes a massive electrical explosion, so even though he's just standing still channeling, you shouldn't be trying to attack him here. Instead, run away, wait for him to finish his channel, and go back to using normal attacks, which are much easier to read and interrupt. If you're struggling here, save your transformation so that you have extra health to take the damage. Also, because his empowered attacks do extra shock damage, have some shock quelling powder handy. You could also try using the Loong Scale armor that you got for beating Kangjin's star, or adding a Thunderbolt Horn Soak to your gourd, giving yourself extra shock resistance after using it. While his weapon's empowered, he also does extra AoE components on several of his regular attacks. Instead of striking a single point with lightning, he now strikes 2 or 3. Again, this makes it a lot harder to avoid, so you should play safely and do your best to not get caught by multiple consecutive hits. Very few things will straight up one-shot you, you can very easily get comboed if you're not careful. Now, he gets one other very special and extremely lethal move during this empowered phase. When you see him assume this stance, kind of holding his blade horizontally and freeze in place for a second, he's about to unleash a massive strike that destroys everything around him. So when you see him ready this attack, get away, it does absolutely massive damage, it can kill you very easily, and it inflicts a ton of shock. Again, his combos aren't super complex here, you should be able to read everything he does, but reading it and avoiding it are two slightly different things. So don't be surprised if this takes a few attempts and some practice. The good news is, this practice is going to be very good for when you encounter Yellow Loong. You could say that both Yellow Loong and Cyan Loong are the sort of fights that force you to get good, rather than relying on cheesy tricks. That said, if you do have any fun cheesy tricks that completely trivialize them, do let me know down in the comments below. With that, here's how my fight went against Cyan Loong. Now, with Red, Black, and Cyan Loong defeated, you're able to battle Yellow Loong in Chapter 4. However, if you've been doing this as you've been progressing through the chapters, be warned, the fight is brutally difficult. Honestly, in terms of difficulty, it's right up there with some of the DLC bosses from Elden Ring's Shadow of the Erdtree. That said, personally, I enjoyed it. I think it is the best fight that I've done so far in the game. But that's it, because Yellow Loong is such a powerful boss, he requires a video all of his own. I'm going to go over his moveset in detail, especially because, instead of gaining new moves as the phases go lower, he simply extends his existing combos, which is really cool because it allows you to learn things as you go, but it also means he's very, very dangerous because he doesn't behave the same way throughout the fight. That's it. As soon as I finish the video, I will link it up in the card and down below. Also, if you prefer reading to watching, or want to brush up on any specific mechanic, then I'm going to have a written guide over at Maxwell.gg that should walk you through all of these boss fights. On the other hand, if you're just trying to progress and you're stuck on maybe the Yellow Wind Sage or Yellow Brow, then check out my boss guides for those, which will be up in the card and down below. One thing that I've noticed personally is these optional side bosses are way more difficult than the main story bosses, which I think is a good thing, because if a player comes across a main story boss and gets absolutely smashed, they can't progress. Whereas if you come across a side boss and get absolutely smashed, you can always come back later, after you've gotten good or after you simply have better gear. Though I'm curious if that's a me thing or if you've experienced something similar. Be sure to share your thoughts down in the comments below. Now before I go, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for the continued support. For as low as $1 a month, you can now make videos just like this one possible. Link support is down below. And a big thanks to everyone who watched the video to the end. I'm glad you enjoyed. Good luck on your Loong journey through Black Myth Wukong, and I hope to see you in the next one.